and largely failed. Now, America turns its energy toward building an industrial 1870s.
A time of explosive industrial growth and the powerful men who built it.
In just a few decades, America transformed from a largely agricultural nation into an industrial powerhouse, building railroads, steel mills, and factories at a staggering pace. Railroads crisscrossed the country, connecting distant markets and enabling goods, people, and information to move faster than ever before.
New steel production methods allowed for taller buildings, stronger bridges, and railroads that could stretch across the entire continent.
Andrew Carnegie built a steel empire so vast it dominated the entire American industry, making him one of the richest men in the world. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil. It became a near-total monopoly over the American oil industry. He controlled nearly every stage of production. These industrialists used trusts and mergers to eliminate competition entirely, controlling prices, wages, and entire markets. Critics began calling these men robber barons, accusing them of building fortunes through ruthless tactics and exploiting workers along the way. Ordinary factory workers, including children, often worked 12-hour days in dangerous conditions for minimal pay.
In response, workers began organizing into labor unions, demanding better wages, safer conditions, and shorter workdays. Major strikes, like those at Homestead and Pullman, sometimes turned violent as companies and workers clashed over the future of American labor.
Millions of immigrants arrived during this period, providing the labor force that powered America's factories, often facing discrimination and difficult conditions.
This era created enormous wealth for a few and enormous hardship for many, setting the stage for a growing demand for reform.
This growing inequality would soon fuel a powerful new movement, demanding change, the Progressive Era.
Between the 1870s and the 1910s, over 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States, seeking work, safety, and opportunity.
Most arrived through Ellis Island in New York Harbor, where officials processed and inspected new arrivals before they could enter the country.
This new wave came Southern and Eastern Europe, Italy, Poland, Russia, and Greece, different in language, religion, and culture from earlier immigrant groups.
On the West Coast, Chinese immigrants arrived seeking similar opportunity, but faced growing hostility that led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This was the first major law to restrict immigration by nationality.
Many immigrants settled in crowded urban tenements, often facing overcrowding, poor sanitation, and difficult living conditions.
Despite the hardships, immigrant communities built vibrant neighborhoods, churches, and mutual aid societies that preserved their cultures while adapting to a new country. Immigrants became the backbone of America's industrial workforce, taking on grueling factory jobs that fueled the nation's rapid economic growth.
Many immigrants faced discrimination and a rising nativist movement, which viewed new arrivals with suspicion and pushed for stricter immigration limits.
Urban political machines often provided immigrants with jobs and support in exchange for votes, a controversial but powerful force in city politics.
Many immigrants became active in the growing labor movement, organizing alongside native-born workers to demand better wages and conditions. These immigrant waves permanently reshaped American culture, cities, and the workforce, laying groundwork still visible in the country today.
With millions of workers now packed into factories and cities, the stage was set for a powerful new force, the labor movement. 12-hour days, dangerous machinery, and minimal pay were the norm for millions of American workers, conditions that pushed people toward collective action. One of the first major labor organizations, the Knights of Labor, welcomed workers of nearly every trade, race, and gender, pushing for an 8-hour workday and fair wages.
A labor rally in Chicago turned deadly in 1886 when violence broke out. The Haymarket Affair became a turning point that shaped public perception of the labor movement for years.
The American Federation of Labor took a different approach, focusing on skilled workers and practical goals, like higher wages and shorter hours, rather than sweeping social change.
At Carnegie's steel plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania, a bitter strike turned violent when the company brought in armed guards to break it. Stark example of how far industrialists would go to crush organized labor.
The Pullman strike paralyzed rail traffic nationwide until federal troops were sent in to break it, showing how far the government would go to side with business over labor.
A tragic factory fire in New York City killed nearly, exposing horrifying safety failures and sparking outrage nationwide.
Public outrage over the fire helped push through new workplace safety laws and building codes, proving that tragedy could translate into real, lasting change.
Women played a critical role throughout the labor movement, organizing strikes and unions in industries like garment work, where conditions were often especially harsh.
Reformers also pushed hard against child labor, which remained widespread in factories and mines well into this era, eventually leading to new legal protections for young workers.
Labor's gains came slowly and unevenly. Courts, corporations, and even the government often sided against unions for decades to come.
Many protections we take for granted today, the 8-hour workday, workplace safety standards, and the right to organize, trace directly back to this era's hard-fought battles. As workers organized, a broader political movement was rising alongside them, one determined to reform American society and government itself. While cities industrialized, American farmers struggled with falling crop prices, crushing debt, and unfair railroad shipping rates.
Out of this frustration grew the populist movement, farmers organizing politically to demand fairer treatment from railroads, banks, and the government.
They called for regulating railroads, an 8-hour workday, a graduated income tax, and expanding the money supply to ease farmers' debts.
In 1892, these farmers formed the People's Party, running candidates for office and briefly becoming a serious force in national politics. The Populist Party itself faded by the century's end, but many of its ideas would soon reappear in a new, broader reform movement.
Progressivism grew out of similar frustrations, but focused on cities, corporations, and government corruption, pushing for reform across nearly every part of American life.
Investigative journalists, known as muckrakers, exposed corrupt politicians, unsafe food industries, and dangerous factory conditions fueling public demand for change.
The federal government began targeting massive monopolies through antitrust lawsuits, aiming to restore fair competition to the economy.
New laws like the Pure Food and Drug Act created federal oversight of food and medicine safety for the first time in American history.
Progressives also pushed reforms like the direct election of senators and, eventually, women's suffrage, expanding who had a voice in American democracy. In crowded cities, reformers worked to improve sanitation, housing, and public health, tackling problems industrialization had created, but largely ignored.
By the 1910s, these movements had permanently expanded the role of government in regulating the economy and protecting ordinary citizens.
As reform reshaped the nation at home, America was also beginning to look outward, toward a bigger role on the world stage. One progressive-era movement was closing in on a victory decades in the making, the fight for women's right to vote.
The movement traced back to 1848, when activist Seneca Falls Convention first formally demanded the right to vote, a cause that would take over 70 years to fully win. For decades, suffragists organized, petitioned, and lobbied state by state, winning small victories, but still far from a national right to vote. In 1872, suffragist leader Susan B. Anthony was arrested for voting illegally, a deliberate act meant to challenge the law and draw national attention to the cause.
Western states like Wyoming and Colorado granted women the vote decades before the rest of the nation, proving the idea could work in practice.
By the early 1900s, a new generation of suffragists brought fresh energy and bold new tactics to a movement that had been fighting for over 50 years. Massive public parades, like the 1913 March in Washington, D.C., put the movement impossible to ignore, drawing national media attention. Some suffragists took even bolder action. picketing outside government buildings for months, facing arrest and harsh treatment for their peaceful protest. As women stepped into vital roles during World War I, public and political support for suffrage grew. It became harder to argue women didn't deserve full citizenship.
In 1919, Congress finally passed the 19th Amendment, sending it to the states for ratification.
On August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, guaranteeing American women the constitutional right to vote.
Mark victory, though many women of color still significant barriers to voting for decades afterward women's, showing the fight for full equality was far from over.
As this era of reform reached its peak at home, the United States was also stepping onto the world stage in a new way, through war and empire. Reform had reshaped life at home. Now, the United States was about to step onto the world stage in a much bigger way, as a global power.
By the 1890s, a booming economy and a modernized navy left many Americans eager for the country to compete with European powers on the world stage.
In Cuba, rebels were fighting for independence from Spanish colonial rule, a struggle that captured growing American attention and sympathy. American newspapers published sensational, often exaggerated stories about Spanish Brew Cuba, a style of reporting that became known as yellow journalism, stirring public outrage.
In February 1898, the USS Maine mysteriously had 250 American sailors, and public anger surged even though the cause was never fully confirmed.
Remember the Maine became a national rallying cry, pushing the United States rapidly toward war with Spain. In April 1898, Congress declared war on Spain, a conflict that would last only a few months, but reshape America's global role.
In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy swiftly defeated the Spanish fleet at Manila Bay in the Philippines. A stunning early victory far from Cuba.
In Cuba, volunteer cavalry units known as the Rough Riders fought alongside regular troops in fierce battles that captured the American public's imagination.
By August 1898, Spain had surrendered. The entire war lasted less than 4 months.
The resulting Treaty of Paris handed the United States control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, and Cuba gained independence, though still under heavy American influence.
For the first time, the United States held overseas colonies, a dramatic shift that sparked fierce debate about what kind of nation America wanted to be.
Anti-imperialists argued that ruling colonies betrayed America's founding ideals, while expansionists believed the nation had a duty and an opportunity to lead on the world stage.
As the 20th century began, America had reformed itself. On the world stage, the 20th century was about to test it, with global war and economic collapse. Next, World War, 1910s to 1910s.